Donk has been the #1 player on Faceit for pretty much all of 2024. And over the last few weeks, I've watched over 100 of his demos to answer this one question. How do you carry in CS2? Now you might think, just have good aim. And before I watched these demos, I kind of thought the same thing, but there is way more to it. And a lot of it is stuff both you and I can use to carry way more games. Today, I'm going to go through the 3 core concepts I learned from Donk, and by the end of this video, you're going to know exactly how to carry just like Donk in CS2. So let's get started. The first thing to talk about is movement. Yes, I'm talking about the Donk slide, the Donk crouch, and the fact of the matter is, movement is usually overlooked by most Counter-Strike players, but it's actually very important. Having good movement allows you to live in a lot of situations you probably shouldn't, but more importantly, it also allows you to get way more kills than you probably should. Let's look at an example. Donk is in a pretty tough situation. The whole T side is coming middle, and pretty much all of these duels are pretty T side favored. Obviously, aim is a significant factor here, but notice as well how Donk uses his movement to make himself way harder to hit. And this type of movement where you use crouching and strafing a lot is very common in pistol rounds. I've actually made a full video about this concept, which you can check out on the channel, but obviously Donk is going to use his movement to his advantage in rifle rounds as well, so let's take a look at that. The main movement tech you will see on rifle rounds is the Donk slide, and if you don't know how to do it, you basically want to wide swing into an angle, crouch and start spraying, but you want to start walking back while crouched in the direction you came from. It takes a little bit of practice, but it's very effective. The idea behind it is that you're offsetting your opponent's aim with the wide swing, so they're correcting to that wide swing, but when you start moving backwards, they're kind of overshooting the target, which makes it very difficult for them to get the instant headshot or quickly adjust to you in time before you can kill them. The main thing that is difficult about this is deciding when to donk slide and when not to donk slide. For the most part, the donk slide is most effective when you know where the enemy is and they don't really know where you are. If you're not 100% sure where the enemy is, you're taking a big risk by wide swinging in the donk slide. So ideally, you know where the enemy is before you attempt this. And obviously, the main advantage is that you're forcing the enemy to readjust to you. So the donk slide is kind of situational. Keep that in mind. You want to know where the enemy is, and ideally they don't really know where you are. So yes, abuse the donk slide as much as possible. It's really, really strong. Otherwise, doing just your normal peaks like you would when, you know, doing like a pre-fire map is usually pretty good. Now, let's move on to the next concept, which is positioning. And positioning is something most players learn over time, but it's by far the most common mistake that beginner players make. A lot of the time, you probably have pretty good aim, but you might be messing up a lot on positioning and movement around the map, which is why I'm covering these concepts first. The key thing with positioning is to subvert expectations. You want to be catching your opponent off guard with your positioning as much as possible. Most beginners kind of tend to sit in the common positions, especially on the CT side. And while this works for a while, as you rise up the ranks, you're going to find it a lot harder as you face better players that are more used to these angles and are able to pre-fire you. So this is where adjusting your positioning really comes into play. Let's take an example from Donk. While taking a one-on-one duel against MHL, he's going to use his positioning to make this duel as difficult as possible for his opponent. The best way to look at this is actually from the perspective of MHL. After missing the initial shot, he obviously takes cover, then crucially after re-peeking, he doesn't actually see Donk, meaning he assumes he's probably crossed back in towards short. And this is why MHL goes back to holding this tight angle at the bricks. Now, in actuality, Donk is in the ladder room, and due to how the angles work here, once he peeks out, he's able to see MHL's shoulder without being seen himself. Now, already this is an advantage, but this next part is the most important. After doing a little bit of damage to MHL, he instantly repositions back towards the ladder room, and this is the #1 thing you need to think about. Try to reposition as much as possible, especially after taking contact. Doing this is going to keep your opponents in the dark and makes it really difficult for them to predict how you're going to take the next duel. Here's another example which I believe pretty much any of us could pull off. Donk is playing around middle on Anubis, and early on he uses some utility to block off the T side. Later on, the Ts are going to start using some pretty standard utility towards middle to take control, and because of this, Donk is going to make a solo play to try and get info, and as you can see in this example, also a kill. Now, you can definitely use this in your games as well, but this next duel is really what I want to highlight. Notice how when he takes contact onto the player on the right side here, he uses a very tight angle to kind of take a couple of shots here and there. This is going to make his opponent think that Donk is kind of just sitting at this angle, he's going to stay at this angle. And the last thing he's going to expect is where Donk positions to next. Donk is actually going to peek out way wider here than you would normally expect, and this completely catches his opponent off guard. Now think about this from the opponent's perspective. He thinks he's taking a really good duel here by wide swinging, since he's going to be out of vision from Donk while he's going to be able to see him. But it's actually Donk who's catching him off guard because of this wider positioning. And this is a concept you can use in tons of different situations. These types of angles exist on literally every map, and if you practice it, you can definitely get really good at this. These slight adjustments in where he's positioning make a big difference when you're playing at the highest level, and it's definitely going to work in mine or your games as well. The final concept is Donk's aim in general, and specifically spray control. Now we all know that Donk has insane aim. We've all seen it, but he usually doesn't have the most flashy instant headshot one tap type of kills. The thing that Donk really excels at is spray control, and not even necessarily spray transfers, but just really clean spray control kills. And honestly, this is great for us because spray control is something that we can train to be really consistent. And once we get really good at it, you will notice that your level of kills, your baseline, is going to increase way more than you would from training instant headshot type of kills, which usually is a little less consistent. Now, I can't necessarily guarantee you're going to have Donk level sprays by the end of this video, but if you use the training resources I provided, I think you can definitely get to a level where you can carry games pretty easily. Let's go through a couple of examples. So take this clip, for example, from Donk. He's simply pushing top mid on Dust 2, and you'll notice that even though he doesn't immediately hit the headshot in his opponent here, his spray is almost perfect on the follow-up, and he gets the frag within the next 5 bullets. And this is the ideal. We want to be getting frags within 5 to 6 to 7 bullets, especially when we spot someone and we don't get the instant headshot. And when you look at this from the enemy POV, you can see just how hard this is to deal with and just how quickly he actually dies here. You'll notice how Donk is using the Donk slide technique, but it doesn't even necessarily matter. His opponent here dies so quickly to the instant spray down that he basically has no chance. And this is really what makes Donk so hard to beat in a 1v1. Here's another example of Donk taking a duel on the A site. This one's a little bit different. He's going to wait for his teammate to take contact under the balcony, and then he's going to swing out. And this leads to a really nice spray transfer. And if you slow this clip down a little bit as well, you notice he mixes in some of these movement aspects with the crouches and the strafing to offset his opponent's aim. All this to say, spray control is super important in CS2. There are more than a few ways to practice these types of techniques, but I'm going to be using Refrag, which I believe is the best and the easiest way to practice these, so let's hop into the routine. For the movement aspect of things, there's 2 different types. So we have map movement and aim movement. For map movement, you can use a mode like Refrag's latest mode, Refrag Momentum, which is basically a game mode which helps you train common skill jumps that you're going to need to use in game, and just helps you get around the map way faster, way more efficiently, and you're just gonna look like a KC god while doing it. It's also just a really fun game mode to play in general. When we're talking about aim movement, one of the best modes in my opinion is X-Fire and also Crossfire. So these 2 modes are really good for training your strafe back in, your Donk slide back in. These types of movements are really good to practice using Crossfire or X-Fire. For the spray control stuff specifically, we can really hone in on our Donk slide technique and spray transfers as well. On Refrag, we have a spray transfer mode, which is actually insane for training this spray transfer stuff. You can use the Donk slide while trying to train your spray transfers. The bots will peek in at random intervals so you actually get realistic scenarios in game, which is way better than just shooting a static target while standing still. This is the best way to train spray control. Outside of those game modes, we also have our classics like Pre-Fire, Defender. There's also Nadar. We have tons of different game modes which help you improve on Refrag. And if you want to try it out, you can use the code DONK15 for 15% off your Refrag subscription. So give it a go. It's the best Counter-Strike training platform in the world. So that's the video, guys. If you enjoyed it, leave a thumbs up and subscribe for more content like this. Also, leave a comment on what you want to see next. Thanks for watching. Peace out.